Thanks, Erica, and thanks everybody for joining us. We will cover today 5 topics, and those 5 topics are in order. We'll take a look at the next slide. Privacy, the just completed election relative to the political ad category, what's going on in Congress, some top issues like transit, and we'll wrap up with cannabis. We'll start today with privacy because it was on the ballot in California. We have a special guest with us here, Gary Kibel, who's pronounced like Bible. Gary is with the New York firm of Davis and Gilbert. Davis and Gilbert specializes in communications, advertising, and in this case, privacy. Gary has advised several OAAA member companies about privacy, cannabis, and other issues that are relevant to us. So we'll ask Gary today to take a look what happened in California and pose these questions to him on your behalf. What did transpire in California in terms of the substance there and the outcome? Gary, will that inspire other states to look what California did and try to push the needle on privacy? Or could it even inspire Congress if we have this patchwork of state regulation to finally take action? And then to connect all this together, what does the California vote mean? And what does all this push toward privacy mean to us in the out-of-home industry? Gary?
Sure, Ken, and thanks very much, everyone, for having me here with you today. So happy to talk about some of these privacy issues because there have been very important developments over the past few years, and there was an important development on Election Day in California. To take a step back for a second, it's important to understand the way that privacy laws work in the United States. Many of you are probably familiar with, in the European Union, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. That is a law that applies to everything related to data and privacy and personal information. It's sort of an omnibus privacy law. We don't have anything like that in the United States. We have different sectoral laws that address different issues, such as children's advertising, healthcare data, financial services data, but there is no national privacy law. The closest thing we have is on the federal level, the Federal Trade Commission regulates deceptive and unfair practices. That applies to advertising claims, and they use that right to regulate privacy. But there is no overarching privacy law. So 2 years ago, California came up with the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And the way that actually came about was there was a wealthy real estate investor in California who got the privacy bug, and he sponsored a ballot initiative in California. It would have been a really difficult law for industry, so industry started to negotiate with him, and he made a deal that if the legislature would pass a law by June of 2018 dealing with privacy, he would withdraw his signatures so that the ballot initiative would not go forward. That's how the CCPA came about, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And the CCPA basically has 3 main requirements. Consumers are allowed to reach out and find out what information you have about them. They can request deletion of that personal information, and they have the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information. Not going to go into super detail, but under this law, personal information is defined incredibly broadly. It's not just name and email address. It's IP address, geolocation, any sort of persistent identifier like a tracking pixel. And sale is described extremely broadly as well. So if you allow a company to be on your website with a tracking pixel and collect a persistent identifier, that can be viewed as personal information. So now let's talk about what happened last week. So the CCPA was in place for 2 years. The same wealthy real estate investor decided to sponsor a new ballot initiative in 2020 called the California Privacy Rights Act, CPRA. This time, he did submit the signatures. He did get the initiative on the ballot on Tuesday, and it passed. I think the percentage was about 56, 58%. What the CPRA does is it basically amends the CCPA and makes it a lot stricter, and it adds a lot more requirements into this existing California privacy law. Some of the new things that are added that are very significant from the CPRA is that it gives consumers now the right not just to find out what information you have about them or delete it, it gives them the right to correct certain information. It also imposes upon companies a data minimization obligation, basically only collect what you need to collect, and security obligations. It hones in also on behavioral advertising and defines a new category of information called sensitive personal information and includes geolocation data as part of the sensitive information. Now, it's very important to keep in mind that CCPA and CPRA are opt-out privacy laws. It doesn't require you to get opt-in consent from people to collect and process their information, but it requires new notification obligations on your behalf. You need to have new things stated in your privacy policy, and you need to have certain links on your website that you may not have had previously before. CCPA required a link that said, "Do not sell my personal information" on your homepage if it was deemed that you're selling personal information. And again, you have to keep in mind, this is an incredibly broad definition of sale. Look at the bottom of websites of some major retailers, Walmart and others, and you'll see a new link right now that says, "Do not sell my personal information." CPRA may require additional new links. You may have to say, "Do not sell or share my personal information." Or if you collect geolocation information, you may have to say, "Limit the use of my sensitive personal information." So the fear from businesses is that these new links and disclosures are going to misrepresent to consumers what you're really doing with the data, because the links sound a little bit scary when all you may be doing is collecting data to geo-target ads. Another very important thing that came out of the CPRA is that California now has to establish a brand new agency that will do nothing other than enforce California privacy laws. This will be the first standalone privacy regulator in the United States. They have no other job but to focus on privacy. So what can that mean for business? It can mean that enforcement is going to increase once this new agency comes about. Now, this is not all going to happen tomorrow. The CPRA has an effective date of January 1st, 2023, although it applies to data collected as of January 1, 2022. And the CCPA is currently in effect right now, and the California Attorney General is starting to investigate companies. So you shouldn't sit on your hands. You should focus on compliance issues right now. Two other things I want to talk about, and then I'm happy to take questions now or later at the end. Ken mentioned the importance to the out-of-home advertising industry and also what might happen on the state and federal level. I think this is all very important for the out-of-home industry for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's a lot of new data collection going on in the industry that wasn't happening years ago. Beacons on out-of-home properties collect a lot of information. There's a lot of matching of online to offline data. And you may have your own company website, which is reaching consumers and may be full of embedded pixels collecting data. All of these different activities are impacted by these new privacy laws and require new disclosures and perhaps new opt-out rights for consumers. And you also need the ability to process any consumer requests that come in. And the law has specific requirements about how you process that. I think of all the things I mentioned, perhaps the beacons and geolocation data are the most significant issues which are going to require the out-of-home industry to re-examine disclosures and consumer rights that are in place. Ken also mentioned, rightly so, about what are other states going to do and what is the federal government going to do. There are other states that have been putting in place new privacy and data security laws. None have been enacted as significant as CCPA and CPRA, but other states are getting close. For instance, in New York, where I'm located, there is a new law called the New York Shield Act, which requires companies to put in place certain security procedures to keep information secure. And there have been laws considered in New York that could be similar to CCPA and that could actually be even worse than CCPA. One of the proposals would allow for a private right of action. So the class action lawyers could all come out of the woodwork and sue. Another one of the laws that's proposed in New York puts in place this idea of a fiduciary obligation that a company would have with respect to consumers' data, that you have some inherent obligation to treat that data properly and keep it secure and only use it for authorized purposes. Washington State has been kicking around a privacy law. They're on their third attempt at trying to pass it. If it does pass, it's more rigid than CCPA because CCPA is mostly consumer-facing issues, but the Washington State law would bring in internal data security concerns as well. And so that would be a very significant law. So with all these different states looking at different laws, of course, there's a plea for the federal government to do something and come up with one standard. And there have been bills proposed in Congress that would put in place sort of a national privacy law. None have made it, none of the significant laws have made it past committee. And the two key things that the Democrats and Republicans have not been able to agree on is preemption and private right of action. Will any federal law preempt California's CCPA? Now, from my perspective, my own personal view, if it doesn't preempt state law, then what's the point? It actually makes things more complex, not easier. But preemption is a big debate that's going on right now. And the second thing is, will there be a private right of action? Will individuals be allowed to sue to enforce these laws, which then, of course, brings along class action lawyers who will then come out and bring class action lawsuits. So these are the two big issues which are going to be debated in the new Congress. My personal view is that as more states pass privacy laws, comprehensive privacy laws, there will be increased pressure on Congress to do something. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I would guess that you are going to see a few new states come out with privacy laws, and then you'll see maybe later in 2021, Congress finally start to realize that we've got to come up with a national standard. Otherwise, it's really not benefiting consumers if compliance is just too challenging for businesses. So with that, maybe I'll stop there for a second, Ken, and see if there are any questions from you or attendees before we move on to other issues.
Thanks, Gary, for that clearly worded summary of what happened in California and how it applies to the rest of the country and how it applies to our business. We have a question regarding that latter point as to application to our business. Most of your comments were about California, but if I'm not domiciled in California, does it make any difference regarding my website or not?
Sure. So two important things there. Firstly, there is a threshold test under the law about whether or not it applies to you. It firstly says you need to be doing business in California, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and then says you need to be collecting personal information of California consumers and meet one of three thresholds, either greater than 25 million in revenues, you process more than 50,000 or more records of California consumers' household or devices, or you generate more than 50% of your revenue from selling personal information. It's that middle tier, the 50,000 records, that usually trips up most companies, because if you have a website and you're dropping cookies on people's computers, it's easy to get to 50,000. The CPRA will raise that number to 100,000. The idea is to carve out small businesses. In terms of whether or not it applies to you, if your business is not located in California, it's that test that all states have about the long-arm jurisdiction test, it's called, about that you may not be physically located in a state, but do you have enough connections to that state to be subject to their jurisdiction? Do you have agents who are located in the state? Are you targeting your goods or services specifically into that state? So there is that jurisdictional test. But if you are reaching those other thresholds, I think California would say you're obviously targeting California if you're getting so many people from California accessing your products and services. But there certainly is an argument, Ken, that if you're located in New Jersey and you just happen to get some random consumers in California accessing your website, that you're really not subject to that law.
So thanks, Gary. And as mentioned earlier, we'll take questions at the end. But just to sum up, we could expect further focus in other states, perhaps in your state. Gary mentioned New York and Washington State. And we'll probably see some discussion of this in Congress. I don't know if you took notes or not, but if you're on this webinar, you'll get the thorough, substantive summary of what happened in California from Gary's firm at the conclusion of the webinar. Gary's going to stay on as we go through the rest of our political report for questions. And of course, you can communicate offline as well. Let's take a look at some of the other political developments from around the country, starting with the political ad category, which for us is a opportunity in the pandemic. It's a growth category. If you look at the image here from Do It Outdoor, Regis at Do It Outdoor said their political category was up 75 to 80% compared to 16. If you go to Lamar, Sean Riley said that Lamar was up double from 18. So by any measure, including Kantar tracking, this represents a growth category for us. And in terms of specifics to the election, it raises the question, who is Joe Biden relative to our media? So let's take a look at Joe Biden and answer some of those questions about what he is and what he's done regarding out-of-home advertising. First, and perhaps foremost, Biden is a customer. The presidential campaign, which is shown here, Biden for President, bought extensively in battleground states, including in Georgia. So think about that in terms of the closeness of the election, in terms of the razor thin margins and how everything matters. So as we start our analysis of President-elect Biden, he is a customer. During the campaign, he sent out, if we go to the next slide, this tweet to his 11+ million Twitter followers, remembering a billboard from his first campaign. So he's a longtime customer and put up a billboard when he ran for Senate. And as you know, that was a long time ago. So in Joe Biden, we have a current customer and a long time customer. If we go to the next slide, the DNC, which is at least by title under the control of the presidential campaign, and its job is to support the presidential campaign, same for the RNC on the Republican side. The Democratic National Committee bought north of $5 million in out-of-home advertising in virtually every format. So we see here a bus, it happens to be in Pennsylvania, but the DNC bought in 6 or 7 battleground states of a significant pre-election buy. And one of the goals of this campaign was to get people to vote early. There are many reasons people voted early, but one of it was that there was advertising reminding people in the air, or if we go to the next slide, this image on the right is a favorite of mine because of those sticky backs on the mirror, which reminds me of my office. But here we have in Arizona in Spanish, a poster in a beauty shop. So you can't go to the beauty shop without seeing in your language a message to vote. Or if you're a student in the left image, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, that's a newspaper rack stand. So virtually every format in every place outside of home, there was an encouragement to vote early, including if you're going to go to a Baptist church in Detroit, in the battleground state of Michigan, you could see this stenciled message in the sidewalk to vote early there. And by the way, all science, all statistics from the election point to the fact that millions did vote early in these battleground states. So to answer the Joe Biden question, customer, longtime customer, social influencer, and through his arm of the party, the DNC, a major buyer of out of home going into this election. To look at a more localized example, and by the way, if you look at the money spent in out of home, most of it is for local candidates. Here's an example that will go into our success model as we look at the 2020 election. On the image here, we see Sherry Bustos, who's a sort of a mid-ranking, on the way up Democrat in the Congress, shown here with Carrie Yoakum. She had a very tough race this time and was challenged in basically farm country Illinois in the Quad Cities area to the west of Chicago. So you had a well-funded opponent, a well-organized opponent, and part of her strategy was to say she was on the side of the farmers. So if we go to the next slide, when she was endorsed by the Farm Bureau, candidate Sherry Bustos put that message up in 13 counties on billboards. So it's a big landmass, it's a big area, but her message was, I'm on the side of the farmers, the Farm Bureau endorsed me, and the outcome in this race was, like the rest of the country, razor thin. She won by 52-48 and prevailed in that election. So here we have a local example of a candidate weaving into the overall message of the campaign, in this case, in farm country, Illinois, and a successful outcome. I'm going to cite one other thing that stands out to me in the election of 2020. If we take a look at this next slide, I'm particularly interested in the direct mail part that's on the right here. This is a piece of direct mail, which is a competitive medium to ours, mailed in Oregon on behalf of Peter DeFazio for re-election to Congress. And if we see who the influencers are here, they're what I would call peers. They're people whose hometowns are named, and they're designed strategically to look like you, to look like a swing voter, to look like somebody that might be a neighbor of yours. What used to happen in advertising is that political advertising relied on endorsements from other politicians. You don't see that anymore because other politicians are not trusted. It used to be very common that political advertising would rely on endorsements from other media, like the Eugene, Oregon newspaper endorsed me, or the Orlando Sentinel endorsed me for Congress. You don't see that anymore. What you do see in this example on the right is peers who are suggesting to people just like them in Oregon that I'm going to vote for DeFazio, so therefore you should as well. To apply all this thinking to the image on the left, this is exactly what we saw in out-of-home advertising. So instead of the Pittsburgh newspaper endorsed Biden, or the Philadelphia paper, or some other politician, we have here Mark. Just like in the direct mail piece, Mark is a swing voter looking to influence other swing voters. And this out-of-home campaign was run in Pennsylvania and other battleground states, aimed at neighbors and peers. To move on to the next point about the election, let's spend a little bit of our time today thinking about Congress. We're interested in certain committees in the House and Senate, and who prevailed and who's in charge. If we start with the House, the Democrats had high expectations of increasing their standing in the House, but actually lost seats. So there will be a narrower margin for Speaker Pelosi on the House side. We'll take a look at basically the races that we have an interest in, starting with the chairmanship. In the next slide, the chairman of our committee, Peter DeFazio, who we mentioned in that direct mail piece, is shown here on the right. He's 73. He's been in Congress most of his adult life. He's the personification of an incumbent politician, and he's chairman of the committee. So he has all the benefits and all the liability of experience running against, in this case, someone who's never been a candidate before, who is 28, so he's a generation or two younger, and a social media star. In this case, the opponent had stopped the terrorist on a train inbound to Paris, and that incident was made into a Clint Eastwood movie. This guy's name is Alec, then went on to Dancing with the Stars. He had a very big social media following and really gave Peter DeFazio a run for his money. But in the end, the chairman won. So in Peter DeFazio in Oregon, in this case, the southern western part of Oregon, we have, again, a customer. Peter DeFazio buys billboards. If you ask him about his profile, he would say he's a liberal, he's a progressive, he's a populist, and he's an environmentalist. Looking ahead, he would want to spend big, and I mean really big, in the $1 trillion range for infrastructure, and he's back as chairman. So in the House side, status quo with the same chairman. Let's take a look at the Senate side. What we're going to see on the Senate side is a possible shift in the chairmanship. We see here this image on the left, the current chairman, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, and he's thinking about maybe he's going to take another chairmanship. So if we look at our longtime connection with him, we know him, our people know him. Here we see Jim Moravec and Laura Moravec in Wyoming with Chairman Barrasso. So we're friends and allies with the chairman and work well with him. If you know Jim, you know he started in radio in Casper. And so we have a long relationship with the current chairman. But he might switch to another committee that has importance for Wyoming. And if he does, the chairperson would be Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, who you see here with our OAAA intern from a couple summers ago. So we work well with her. We're in her, we see a pro-business approach, and she knows our people, she knows our business. So either way, we're positioned well on the Senate side. Just quickly, there were several members of the committee that were of the Public Works Committee in the House or in the Senate who were up for re-election. Let's take a look and see who came back. And virtually all of them did. This is an alphabetical, not political order, but from Cory Booker to Dan Sullivan in Alaska, members of the Public Works Committee were re-elected. Probably the toughest race there was Joni Ernst from Iowa, who had a competitive race, but was re-elected. On the policy side, let's just tick off some of the top issues that we're interested in and the Congress is going to be looking at. There will be talk of, and you'll hear a lot of talk about an infrastructure bill. To some degree, this is an old joke in Washington about every week is infrastructure week, but you never see a bill. But there will be refocus now that Biden's elected and DeFazio is chairman on an infrastructure bill that will be a jobs stimulus approach, and from the Democratic side, an environmental bill. We're interested in transit, and I'd say the election was mixed in transit. There was a big win in Austin for a multi-billion-dollar transit measure there, but at the polls in Portland, Oregon, the voters turned down a transportation measure there. On the federal side, the transit community in New York and in most places cheered the Biden reelection. So if we get to where the rubber meets the road on whether there's going to be a big bill, it comes to funding. Raising the gas tax hasn't been done since '93 when Clinton was president. As you know, the Democrats lost in the next mid-year election in '94. Raising the gas tax is probably one of the reasons. It's a regressive tax. It's politically tricky to raise. President Obama was never enamored of raising the gas tax. But we'll see a focus on that now that Biden is president. DeFazio would raise the gas tax, but it's a difficult bit of political gamesmanship to pull this off. So if you don't have new money, how are we going to fund all these things, including transit? That's the question that Congress had last term and will have in the future. What we will definitely see more focus on as part of the environmental interest is a focus on charging stations. More and more consumers are going to be buying electric vehicles. And so the question for us is, if there's going to be more charging stations, where are they located, including could they be located on the highway right of way? So that's certainly one of the issues that we'll be taking a close look at. And sure as we're sitting here today, there'll be more electronic vehicles and more charging stations, whether you're Republican or Democrat or what part of the country you're in. So if we point to the commonality of what we've been talking about with Peter DeFazio says he's an environmentalist. The Democrats generally will want to approach transportation bills from an environmental standpoint. We in the out-of-home business are well positioned to be on the problem-solving side. We are part of the solution. In this case, we've just wrapped up a partnership with Earth Day Network. So our position regarding the environment is we're on the side of the environmentalists, and we're partners with, in this case, Earth Day, as opposed to being an environmental issue. The last issue that we'll take a look at will be, as I mentioned, cannabis, which was on the ballot in 5 states. Cannabis used to be sort of an isolated West Coast, Rocky Mountain High, but not anymore. The 5 states that voted on cannabis include, in this billboard example here, South Dakota and red states and blue states to show how the pendulum has swung toward public acceptance of legal cannabis, because it won in every jurisdiction it was on the ballot. So let's take a look, starting in alphabetical order: Arizona, all the way to South Dakota. Voters are saying by pretty good margins, except for the one of the measures in South Dakota, which did pass, but more narrowly than the other states, that if you're in Montana, Mississippi, New Jersey, voters are saying yes to marijuana legalization. What this means for us is there's going to be more demand for out-of-home advertising. As we chat here today, we're getting 40 cents on the dollar of the ad spend in this category. So that's disproportional to our share of the overall ad market for many reasons. But this too, like political, is an opportunity for us as another 5 states come online for legal cannabis, to make sure that we're opportunistic about growing this category. So if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to get in this game in Montana, if I'm going to start advertising in South Dakota, how do I stay out of trouble? So a quick review of the lightning rods in cannabis advertising would be to stay clear of health claims. That will get you in trouble quickly. Stay clear of marketing to youth, which is generally in the written down state restrictions on cannabis advertising, part of the regulations. Stay clear of over-sexualization of the message, which will also get you in trouble. And based on our experience in certain states, concentration of ads is a problem as well. This year, we looked at 2 legislatures that debated through committee and beyond in Oklahoma and Washington State whether to ban outdoor advertising completely. So we'll likely see that again. And a way to stay out of that debate, to stay out of the crosshairs of trouble, or to follow these easy sort of avoidance of lightning rods, and you'll be fine. So to wrap up today and answer any questions that you may have, let's tie all this together. We're going to have divided government, which has some upsides in terms of there won't be excess. They're not going to be big bills. They're not going to be wild ideas. And there'll be, in divided government, negotiation. There'll be compromise, which tends to work better for us. The political category is a growth category for us, and will be and has grown from 16 to 18 to now a record in 2020. And thanks to programmatic, thanks to the nimbleness of our ability to change copy, we're going to see more growth there. The election is bringing us new opportunities in terms of new categories like cannabis. And to wrap up, a word of thanks about the outreach that you, the members of OAAA, make in terms of our political participation. We see on the left Senator Mike Rounds, who we mentioned is on the Public Works Committee. He's the former governor of South Dakota and won re-election handily. We see him here about 6 years ago at the Daktronics headquarters with Daktronics co-founder Al Kurtenbach in Brookings, South Dakota. On the right, we'll see in that image Martin Daniel, who many of you know is in the Tennessee legislature. Here we see him with a rising star in the Republican Party, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. So we thank people like Martin for being in public service. We thank Al Kurtenbach for opening his headquarters up to Governor Rounds, Senator Rounds. And in Illinois, we thank Cam Buckner, who from out front in Chicago is in the legislature. So Cam was reelected without opposition this time, and is a part of the political future, not only in Illinois politics, but the out-of-home industry. We thank you and anyone like here, Bill Reagan, who supports our candidates. Bill is probably a champion in this category, but we pause after the election to say thank you for participating, and that includes contributing to our candidates. A final word as we wrap up, we pause to remember our friend Wade Leslie, who we see here on the right at 57, passed away on November 3rd. So that was too young. We'll send out information about the services, but on the left, we see Wade with his senator in West Virginia, in this case, Shelley Moore Capito. This picture was taken in 2013, along with other members of the industry in West Virginia. As I mentioned, it's at least possible, if not close to probable, that Shelley Moore Capito could be chairperson of the committee that we most care about in the Senate. So as we think about the future and we think about how we prevail in advocacy, we remember people like Wade Leslie, who knew their elected officials, and our strength, our future, and our political power in the future comes from people like Wade Leslie and you. Thank you. So you got some questions coming in. It starts with the gas tax. And a little bit of background, please, about the gas tax, of when it was raised and could it be raised again. Federal gas tax is 18 and a fraction. There's often state taxes on top of that. It was raised as a budget balancer in 1993. So as you recall, Bill Clinton is president, and by any political yardstick, the Clinton administration did not do well in the 1994 midterms. The Democrats lost significantly in the House and the Senate. And there's been sort of allergy to looking at raising the gas tax since then. Part of the problem from transportation funding is that the gas tax on the federal side is not indexed. So what you had for buying power in 1993 in terms of the dollar has been eroded since then. So you could argue effectively that our transportation buying power has gone backwards. I think there's some chance that both committees would entertain raising the gas tax, but I wouldn't bet on it, because let's remember, as it relates to judicial nominations, as it relates to policy in general, everything has to go through the Senate, and everything stops with Mitch McConnell. So if we think about transit's less relevant in Kentucky than it is in Manhattan. If we think about tax policy, there's going to be less interest in raising your gas tax, which is a regressive tax, on the Republican side. So I'd say it's possible, but not easy at all. I wouldn't bet on it. Gary, you want to take a shot at the gas tax?
I could comment on cannabis advertising and political advertising, but gas tax, I'm just a consumer.
Okay. All right. Well, now that we've got Gary on for a wrap up, not that anyone would violate privacy, and not that anyone would intend to violate privacy, but inadvertently, or if there was a violation of the existing rules on privacy, how much trouble can you get in, and what are the sanctions to punish people who somehow violate privacy rules?
Sure. So, on the federal level, when the Federal Trade Commission brings enforcement actions, and there was a big one just announced today, a settlement with Zoom over their security issues. But when the Federal Trade Commission brings actions, it's usually just a settlement agreement. There's no fines that are imposed, but it does require changes to practices in the organization. And the settlement agreements with the FTC last for 20 years. So it is kind of a burden if it happens. California, under the CCPA, introduced fines. So the California Attorney General can impose fines of, I think it's $2,500 per violation, or $7,500 if it's willful. There is a little bit of a cure period under the CCPA, but sort of up to the Attorney General to decide if this is, rises to the level of imposing fines. Under the new law that was passed, the ballot initiative last week, the CPRA, the cure period is going to go away. And again, you're going to have a standalone agency, and they will probably be more aggressive in looking to impose fines. So it's a very new thing that there's actually a specific dollar figure, because under many other existing privacy regimes, there's either no right to impose fines, or there's sort of a high barrier to show that there's some financial harm that has to be remedied.
And here's a last question on the political category. This goes back to a long taproot of interest of why we don't get more in the political category. And the question is, why did we get more this time? Well, that's I think a multiplicity of reasons, one of which is we're faster, thanks to digital, thanks to programmatic. We're not 25, 30 years ago where there was a lead time in production and installation. Secondly, there was more money in general. 2020 will set an overall record in political spend, and will set a record for out of home. And then there's some, I think, related decisions that go our way. One of the congressmen from out west in the Reno, Nevada market buys every re-election digital advertising because he thinks digital billboards look sharp, they look modern. And if you think about the airwaves in Nevada, Nevada is a battleground state. Vegas in particular is overbought. And when he sees TV, he thinks of all these negative ads that are on crowded television. And for him, out of home is a cleaner, better, clearer way to communicate in that market. So he prefers out of home digital billboards to the airwaves. There are other decision points that go to why we get more. One of my favorite stories is in the Atlanta market, where after the 2000 census, a member of the legislature decided to run for Congress, and virtually no one knew where the district lines were, including the voters and including the candidates, because there were snaky lines that went all over the place. So what this candidate knew more than anything was that he was going to need to communicate with commuters coming in and out of Atlanta. He picked his color, which was David Scott blue. He advertised on billboards. He introduced himself and prevailed then, and has bought billboards ever since then, including the primary in 2020, which was moved because of COVID. So 2 decades later, David Scott is winning on billboards in a very expensive media market where he doesn't need to buy part of Tennessee and 2/3 of Georgia. He needs to talk to commuters that are going in and out of Atlanta to work and back home and to shop. And that's for him a much more efficient and effective way to communicate. So thanks for everybody joining in. This will be recorded. And as I mentioned, if you're on this webinar, you'll get Gary's summary of what happened in California vis-a-vis privacy. We look forward to the next one of these. And until then, if you've got questions regarding the subjects that we mentioned, you know where to find us, and we look forward to serving you and answering your questions in the future. And we look forward to the next election. Thanks.